It's a decision that will determine whether Adnan Syed remains a free man.
The judge's opinion following Thursday's arguments in the Maryland Supreme Court could have implications for future cases.
We explain what each side wants.
If Adnan Syed's legal predicament has you confused, you can be forgiven, because the case even has the most experienced attorneys stumped. That includes Baltimore attorney Steven Klepper and D.C. attorney Susan Simpson.
And I can tell you that I am very happy I'm not one of the attorneys arguing the case.
It is a wild situation we're in. Even independent of Adnan's case, like independent of like my personal interest in this case, this is like bizarro land criminal procedure.
And that means precedents could be set. The decision before the Maryland Supreme Court boils down to what rights victims of a crime have in court. The attorney for young Lee, the brother of Haymon Lee, argues that victims should be able to participate more meaningfully in a hearing where a conviction might be overturned.
It goes back to the issue of sensitivity and dignity and respect. You show someone respect by saying, you have a right to be here, you have a right to be seen, you have a right to meaningfully participate. None of that happened here.
Susan Simpson is on the other side. She co-hosted a podcast about Syed's case called Undisclosed. She agrees that victims have the right to be notified about hearings, but she says participation is a different story.
It undermines the idea of impartial justice. You have families with intense emotional stakes involved who are operating as a sort of a third party in the system, and that's just not how things are designed to work.
But in this case, the defense and the prosecution are on the same side. They both agree Syed's trial was unfair and his conviction should be overturned. So who's advocating for young Lee? His attorney argues Lee should be able to advocate for himself if the state isn't doing it for him. And he's not alone. Kurt Wolfgang agrees. He's the executive director of the Maryland Crime Victims Resource Center. His organization helped pass the 1994 Victims' Rights Constitutional Amendment that's at the center of this debate.
Are they just rights on paper, or are they going to be given substance and meaning by the courts? You know, do they recognize that they are dealing with flesh and blood people here?
He says if the state Supreme Court decides that victims only have the right to be seen and not to be heard,
it's going to set a bad precedent that we are going to have to try to overcome legislatively.
There is not a history of victims having the ability to do that.
Steven Klepper believes no matter what happens in this case, we need some clarity for the future, because all of this debate is centered around different interpretations of the law. He hopes, no matter the result, the government figures out a way to eliminate all of the uncertainty for future cases, because uncertainty can lead to bias.
There are issues that you might view differently in a vacuum, but that when you are rooting for one side or the other, it can deeply affect how you view a highly technical question on which you might not even have an opinion normally.
As for what young Lee hopes to come out of this, all he wants is a fair shake.
At the end of the day, if Adnan Syed's conviction is vacated after all the dust settles and he remains free and the court gives us a reasoned opinion as to why that is, young Lee will accept that conclusion and move on with the rest of his life.
Question who killed Haymon Lee won't be answered on Thursday.
Yeah, the judges will only decide whether to redo the hearing that set Syed free.
And if that's the case, young Lee would get the chance to attend in person. Syed could return to prison if the conviction isn't vacated.
If his conviction is erased, BPD has a cold case on its hands and a victim that never saw justice.
You can find all